And the stranger answers promptly, "They were in bloom, though pale, 'tis true, and sad from waiting long for you." This is like the Scotsman who calls his wife his bonny briar bush, for in the land of morning glow they have a language of flowers. Each plant and blossom has a meaning and either delightful or disagreeable associations. It is a compliment to speak of a girl as a pear blossom, for the pear is one of the most glorious of trees, and its blooms are lovely to behold. It would hardly do, however, to call her a cinnamon rose, for this flower has evil associations. The gisang, as the Koreans pronounce the name of the geisha, as the Japanese call the dancing girls, are associated with the cinnamon rose, for did not the sages tell this story? 12 centuries ago lived the renowned scholar Sul Chang, the greatest of all the learned men of Korea. His head was as full of knowledge as a persimmon is of pulp, and his ideas were as numerous as the seeds in a pomegranate. He taught his countrymen all that was in the books of China, and in the temple of Confucius his portrait hangs to this day. He lived in the kingdom of Silla in the days of its glory, when ships from Japan and China sailed into its seaports and the Arabs from Baghdad brought their pretty wares to exchange for gold, ginseng, camphor, porcelain, cinnamon, ginger, and tiger skins, to take to their renowned caliph and his turbaned nobles at court, of whom we read in the Arabian Nights. When the king of Silla, Sinman, was living in luxury and filling his palace with too many pretty dancing girls who distracted his mind from attending properly to the affairs of state, Sul Chong warned his master against the increasing influence of these women by telling him the following story. Once upon a time, in spring, the peony, king of the flowers, blossomed so gorgeously that it became the admiration of all the lovers of beauty in the whole country. Hundreds of people made long journeys to the capital of Silla to see the bright blossoms. In the king's gardens, on very tall stalks, the many branches were heavily laden with large red flowers. These were indeed lovely to behold, but the king of the whole garden was a single peony, grown on one stem, so that all the strength and nourishment of the plant were concentrated in that unique royal bloom. All saluted this flower as king. When all the other flowers heard of their king's glory, they came to pay their respects at the floral court, of which the peony was sovereign. All the trees sent their choicest blooms as envoys. In one glorious procession of perfume and color, the peach, plum, pear, apple, and persimmon trooped in, each making its obeisance to the monarch of all flowers. All these tree blossoms prided themselves on their being so useful to man as harbingers of the delicious fruits to come. Then, among the bright throng appeared sprightly young virgin flowers, the tea rose in pearl-tinted frock, the azalea in pink, the lily in white, the strawberry blossom, and a score of other pretty creatures of the garden. Last of all appeared the cinnamon rose. She tripped nimbly along in a green skirt and red jacket, with haughty air and breath of spice. One after the other they were presented to King Peony, and gracefully made their salute. But of them all, the king seemed most to favor Miss Cinnamon Flower. He let the others pass out from the court, but lingered long with the spicy visitor, spending much time in her society, as if smitten with her charms. By and by he invited Miss Cinnamon Rose to come and live in the palace, and leaving his ministers to carry on the government, he spent all his time in her society. She was installed in a place near his majesty, and seemed always to have his ear and attention, even when the king's prime minister had to wait long for an audience or even a word. Miss Cinnamon Rose seemed to be the real ruler instead of the king himself. But one day there came to the palace the flower called Old Man. He looked exactly like an aged beggar, dressed in sackcloth and leaning on a staff. Respectfully bowing, he asked if he might share the hospitality of the king's palace. He was welcomed and fed, partaking of the royal bounty. When at last he was given audience of King Peony and was invited to speak, he said, "Out along the road, your majesty, I heard of your rich feast and good things to eat. Now I hear that you need medicine. Although you dress in Chinese silk and none are equal to you in the magnificence of your robes and the splendor of your court, yet you are much like me in your wants, and you need a common knife string, as well as I. Is it not so?" "You are quite right, old man," replied the king. "Yet I like this cinnamon rose, and want her with me. I cannot do without her." "Yes, your majesty. Yet is it not true that if you keep company with the wise and prudent, your reign will be long, powerful, and glorious? But if you consort with the foolish, your house will fall. Did not 3 dynasties of the emperors of Great China fall because of the beautiful women who tempted their majesties to forget their duties? If it were so with the ancients, how much more so is it now?" The king blushed, even to a deep crimson. He confessed his faults and reformed his life. It is said the lesson was not lost on the real human king. He dismissed his harem, sent away the dancing girls, and ruled wisely till the day of his death. Tokugabi's menagerie, cats and dogs. There are many dogs, but few cats, in Korea. Nobody loves poor pussy there. They are not made pets and are rarely seen in the houses of the people. Even bull calves are more caressed by the children than are cats, and the puppy dog takes the place of tabby or grimalkin. Korean cats are not bob-tailed like their cousins in Japan, nor is pussy ever used, as the Chinese kitten is, to tell the time of day by the width of the slits in its green eyes. Alas! The cats in Korea are too wild to enjoy the society of human beings, or human beings theirs. The presence of dogs is especially hateful to them. Mother cats tell their kittens wonderful stories of the cruelty of dogs, and why cats and dogs do not agree. The native roof scramblers can howl and caterwaul, arch their backs, blow up their tails, spit and scratch, or purr pleasantly, lick their fur, and wash their faces with their paws like cats in other countries. They are highly accomplished as mouse catchers and bird eaters, yet they have a hard time of it, for there are too many dogs to make a kitty's life either easy or agreeable. The Korean cat hates to get its feet wet, yet it is often obliged to wade in the water to get rid of the dogs that chase it. As for the furry, purry kittens, one wonders how they ever escape the fierce dogs and grow up at all. Yet it all came about because a certain cat ancestor laughed when it shouldn't have done so. Although it was a lot of school children that made Kitty laugh, the dog never forgave the cat for its frivolity. And this is how it happened. Long, long ago, one of the mountain fairies had come down into the land from the high peaks, and being kindly treated by an old man named Tipul, who kept a wine shop called Tokugabi, and bade him reward the old fellow with a precious stone. So, one night, Tokugabi dropped the gem into Tipul's long-necked wine bottle. Strangely enough, after this, the wine never ceased. The bottle was always full. Every day, Tipul sold plenty to his neighbors, and it was good and cheap, so that the shopkeeper was very popular. Yet, without any refilling, the flask was always ready to overflow. So Tipul had no fear of poverty in extreme old age. Having neither wife nor children, his only companions were a dog named Sunap, or Snap for short, and a cat named Meow. All 3 lived happily together in these times of long ago. But one day the bottle was found to be empty, and when Tipul shook it, nothing rattled inside. Somehow the magic stone had disappeared. Poverty now seemed certain. The old man was nearly paralyzed with grief, and his neighbors all came in to sympathize with him. They knew well that they could buy no wine anywhere else so good and so cheap as they had long enjoyed at Tipul's shop by the river. Yet this loss of the wonderful stone was the very making of Tipul's pets. As for the cat, she became the most industrious kitty ever known. She at once began to ransack every rat's quarters known, not only in her master's home, but in every house in the village, in search of the missing stone. The racket which that cat kept up at night among the rafters and beams under the roof nearly drove some people crazy. They declared that Togabi had got drunk by tasting Tip Pull's drams. Yet it was meow all the time. The cat knocked over tobacco boxes, scratched among hat covers hung on the wall, tipped up the hanging shelves, and upset the crockery in the closet over the kitchen stove. In a word, this four-footed creature played every kind of mischief that people usually ascribe to Togabi, the sooty imp. Yet when anyone climbed up to the attic, looked among the rafters, and peered into the darkness, all he could see was a pair of green eyes that shone like the moon. Poking the uncanny thing with fishing poles or throwing shoes or sticks at it only caused spitting or snarling. So they knew it was a cat and not Togabi, and betook themselves to bed again. Laying their top-knots on their wooden pillows and their bodies on their oiled paper carpet, they soon fell asleep again. The Koreans do not swear, but the way some good folks hurled bad words on all the ancestors of that cat clear back to the time of Kija was dreadful to think of. Indeed, some of their remarks are still preserved in tradition and proverbs. Nevertheless, with all his pains taken, Meow could not find the magic whinstone. As for Tip Pull, he got poorer and poorer. The dog could not climb like Puss among the rafters and the roofs, but being able to run fast and having a nose that could smell a tiger a mile off, he made excursions all over the country, even crossing the ice of the frozen river. Although he fought many another dog, chased many a rat into its hole, and worried about 100 cats, even jumping into woodsheds and running in and out among the cows and horses, he found nothing. Once, while in a store where the pony, tied up with a belly band by ropes to the ceiling, was enjoying its supper of bean soup, the poor dog was nearly kicked to death. The vicious brute, thinking that Snap was trying to steal some beans from its feed box, gave the dog a blow with its hoofs that made Snap go on 3 legs for a week afterward. The long winter passed away, and the ice melted, but the river water was still cold. One day Pussy, while chasing a rat among the rafters of a house of a yangban or gentleman, brushed its whiskers against a greenish soapstone box, such as the king often sends as a present to those whom he likes. Recognizing the smell of something inside as that of his master's long-lost gem, he tried hard by tooth and claw to open it. All Pussy's scratching, biting, and clawing, however, were in vain, nor could the dog help in the least, so a bargain was struck with the rats to gnaw open the box and get the magic stone. Both Sunap and Meow promised to let all rats and mice entirely alone for 6 months, if one of them would agree to gnaw open the box. Delighted at the prospect of peace and quiet for half a year, and especially while the grain should be ripening, both rats and mice worked together until, out of a hole gnawed in the box, polished and hard on their teeth as it was, they got the magic stone. Carrying it in their paws, they dropped it where their former enemies, now so peaceful, could get it. At once the dog took the gem in his mouth and ran to the river, Meow following after. "Now, Kit," said Snap, "get on my back and hold tight to my neck hair with your claws while I swim across. As I must breathe hard, put the gem in your mouth. Mind that you don't open your jaws or yawn or laugh till we get across. Do you hear?" Meow wagged her tail and took the whinstone firmly in her mouth in token of determination to deliver that precious gem safely to her master. All the time, Meow intended to jump ashore and run to her master, while the dog would be shaking off the water from his hair, and thus get the credit for first finding where the stone had been. It was a long, hard swim, and the dog's strength was nearly used up when only 2/3 across the river, but the cat was happy, for she had only to hold on and keep her feet dry. All went well until near the opposite shore. Now it happened just then that a party of children, out of school and ready for fun, caught sight of the odd pair. They had never seen anything so funny in all their lives, and at once they laughed uproariously. Snap was too serious to pay any attention to their glee, but Meow, already tickled with vanity, became positively frivolous. She too joined with the children and laughed so hard that Snap's body was badly shaken, so that he nearly got his nose under water and drowned them both. This made the light-headed and conceited cat laugh all the more. Finally, bursting in a guffaw, Meow dropped the gem out of her mouth so that it was hopelessly lost in the river and fell to the bottom. That was too much for the dog to have his labor thus wasted. Thinking only of his master, the faithful and serious Snap dived to the bottom of the river, tumbling Meow off. You may well believe, though, much scratching and clawing took place before Puss let go and swam ashore. Alas, the dog could not find the precious gem, and when once on land, he her a good shaking. But Meow climbed up a tree, and though nearly frozen to death after her icy bath, kept up growling as long as the dog barked. After that, in Korea, the cats and dogs ceased to be friends. Indeed, they never spoke to each other. Wild, unloved, and unpetted, the cat belongs to the bad animals in Togabe's museum, while the dog is the faithful friend of man, Catkin and the Queen Mother. Korea is called the land of the plum blossom, but in winter the rivers freeze over. Then the men cut through the ice, which is often several feet thick, to catch with their fishing lines and hooks the fish that swim in the water beneath. Yet they are very glad to welcome any sign of the coming spring, and they watch eagerly for the pussy willows to show themselves. Now there was a farmer who lived in Naipo, which is the grain garden of the Korean peninsula, who wanted a little daughter, though other parents cared more for sons. One day Farmer Pack, for that was his name, discovered a pussy willow which seemed to him, after the long winter, like a light shining in a dark place. He plucked it and carried proudly home this branch full of fuzzy little buds. This was a sign of his happiness at the return of spring. He was tired of ice and snow, and now he knew that soon the gloomy hills would burst into a glory of bright colors from the blooming flowers and look like an army with flags. That same day his prayers were answered, and a little girl was born into his home. Giving the pussy willow to his wife, he said, "We shall name our baby Catkin, that is little puss." Catkin never saw a cradle, for the Korean mothers carry their babies on their backs. She was soon out of infancy, and then it was not long before she was standing up and toddling about and playing with her doggy and pet bull. These little pets on 4 legs usually take the place of kittens in a country home in Korea, for the cats are wild and do not allow children to fondle them. Long before she was a dozen years old, Catkin became very fond of fairy stories, of which Korea has a great many, besides thousands of tales of wonderful people and animals, and what happened to them. She often looked up towards the high hills and distant mountains, where she thought the fairies, dragons, ogres, and tigers lived. Here also dwelt the sennin, or mountain spirits, wise and good, of whom the old people talked and the soldiers painted on their banners when they went to war. When about 8 years old, Catkin wanted very much to walk up towards the North Star, which her father showed her shining in the heavens. He had once traveled up into one of the northern provinces, where during the daytime he could see afar off the great snow-white mass of the ever-white mountain rising up to meet the azure sky. There at the top, he had heard, lay the Dragon Prince's pool, out of which flowed the 2 rivers that made Korea an island. One was named the Tumen and the other the Yalu, after the beautiful green and blue sheen on the feathers of a drake's back, so richly colored were its shining waters. When her father told of his travels, Catkin also longed to go north to get to the very top and touch the sky. But this she knew she could not do, even if she had had long legs and were as strong as a man, for the tigers were very numerous and always roaming about. These yellow and black-striped brutes were man-eaters. They loved nothing better for a good dinner than a young girl. So, as she did not know any way of getting to the top of the ever-white mountain and of seeing the deep blue waters of the pool, except by riding on the back of a dragon, which she sometimes dreamed of, she kept waiting and waiting for one of these flying creatures to come, yet it never came. Catkin was bound to have the fairies visit her if possible. So one day, sitting under a persimmon tree and reading a story, she held the book in one hand while she struck the ground several times, saying earnestly, Earth, Spirit, come to me, come up and see me." All of a sudden the air seemed heavy with sweet perfume, and a silver mist like a cloud spread over her house and garden. Then a bright, dazzling light flooded everything, and there stood before her a glistening chariot made of blue jade with golden wheels. It was drawn by milk-white horses, and on a seat of shining silver sat the Western Heavenly Queen Mother herself. Attendant upon the Mother Queen were thousands of the most beautiful maidens, who were all dressed in resplendent robes. They wore amber ornaments, and silver girdles, and necklaces of precious stones, and silken robes with many tassels. Their feet were shod with gold-embroidered velvet slippers, and on their heads were caps of gold studded with glittering gems. Catkin could hardly count the rich ornaments, necklaces, breast chains, and the jade wands like scepters which they held in their hands. These were shaped like lotus flowers. The faces of all these maidens were rosy, their eyes sparkled, and all had small hands and feet. In a voice of great sweetness that sounded like music, the Heavenly Queen Mother looked at Catkin and spoke to her, saying, "Come forward, little maid, fear not. I shall take you with me to my palace in the Island of Gems and give you all you want, besides showering blessings on your people if you will come." Catkin did not feel at all timid or frightened, but came boldly forward and knelt at the base of the chariot. The Mother Queen first touched her with her milk-white jade wand that was carved like a lotus bud and made the little girl rise. In a moment more, a silver chariot with wheels made of turquoise and drawn by two young milk-white dragons wheeled up close to her, and the attendant lady in golden robes bade her step in. The dragons were fierce, powerful, fire-breathing creatures with wide-spreading wings, and their bodies and tails together were of the length of whales, while their eyes darted fire. Yet Catkin was not at all afraid and thought it was great fun. Then up through and far above the clouds the host of bright beings flew. They followed the Queen Mother's chariot until, far away, they poised in mid-sky. Catkin was then told to look over the side of the chariot to the earth and ocean miles and miles below. She was asked if she could recognize her father's cottage, but she could not. The whole village looked only like a gray mass of thatched roofs, and she could pick out only the temple. There, spread out, was the great sea, as blue as a sapphire, and in places deep green like an emerald. But she could see no ships, nor any coast or shores, nor any ranges of mountains, nor signs of the land of Korea. Nothing but ripples and waves were visible. Yet in the center of the azure sea was an island. The trees were emeralds, and the roofs of the houses were of gold, and the windows diamonds. These were so full of light that no lamps were necessary. Beautiful beings, all maidens as lovely in garb and face as those who filled the train of the Queen Mother, walked or played or sang in the gardens, or swam and sported in the sapphire waves, or rowed and sailed about in boats that seemed as if made of marble, they were so white. At a signal from the Queen the singing ceased. Then there rose up wave upon wave of sweetest melody from the players on instruments who were in the gardens below. Catkin thought she heard at intervals the chorus, sounding out the words, rising upward like pulses through the air. "Welcome, lovely mortal, our queen invites, and we greet thee. Manifold be her gifts to thee and thine. Come, thou honored among all Korean maidens. Come to us and join our band, and we shall love thee as one of ourselves." In the wink of a falcon's eye, so short a time it seemed, the Mother Queen and her host descended. As the chariots touched the island, a bevy of radiant maidens came forward, some to attend the Queen Mother, and some to lead Catkin into her own room in the palace. There the most gorgeous robes were put on her, beside a cap begemmed with glittering precious stones of various colors, and a pair of gold-embroidered velvet slippers. Catkin was surprised when one of the shining maidens set a royal tiara adorned with 5 gems upon her brow. "For me?" she asked in surprise. "Yes, for you, whom the Heavenly Mother Queen would honor." "And what do these 5 gems, jade, crystal, malachite, amber, and agate, signify?" asked Catkin. "Ah, that is not for us to tell you, but the Queen Mother ordered these. Tomorrow she will explain to you the secret of each gem." Catkin walked about freely, enjoying the lovely sights and sounds. She also ate with keen appetite, and to her full of the delicacies set on the table before her. Yet never once did she feel sleepy, nor see any beds, nor hear anyone talk of retiring. She wondered what they meant when they said tomorrow, for she could see no sun or moon or twilight. However, she did not think long about such things, and by forgot all about them. When the entire court and all the hosts of the Queen Mother's attendants had assembled, Her Majesty's Chamberlain read the proclamation which declared that the Queen looked with great favor upon the Korean people and had decided to bestow great gifts upon them. For this purpose, she had selected and brought to her palace the Korean maid named Catkin, to endow them through this their daughter with 5 precious traits of disposition and character. In token of gracious thought and tender love, Her Majesty would now present and explain the meaning of the 5 precious gems. These were jade, crystal, malachite, amber, and agate. Catkin kneeled down before the Queen, who placed in Catkin's hands the shining gems, while an attendant fairy took them from her opened palm and placed each one of them on vermilion velvet edged with gold. Then 5 maidens stood by, each with a gem laid on a cushion. After the ceremony of presentation was over, the Queen made a speech which told the Korean maiden's fortune and her future. Catkin would be sent back over the clouds and ocean to the king's palace in the capital of her homeland, and there be made a princess. Many nobles and kings' sons from other countries, hearing of her beauty and her wonderful visit to the Island of Gems, would come to pay her court as suitors. Many would ask for her hand, to be wedded to her, but she was to marry none but the king's son, a prince of her own people. "Take these gems, fair maiden, and bestow their virtues and what they mean upon your people," said the Queen. "1,000 years from now, as men count time, we together will visit Korea again." Then both the Queen and Catkin, stepping into the silver chariot, drawn by the fire-breathing dragons, plunged on and mounted up into space. First they sailed above the clouds, and then dipped downward, steering to Korea and over the mountains, bearing their precious charge to the capital. They reached the ground in a cloud, and the wheels of the chariot stood still before the palace gate. Yet before any mortal eyes could see their full forms, the Queen Mother and the dragons had disappeared, and Catkin stood alone, a resplendent maiden of dazzling appearance, and in the robes given by the Heavenly Queen Mother, which all recognized at once as coming from the Island of Gems. A throng of court ladies and palace attendants and a long line of nobles and princes were already waiting for the maiden, who they knew came gift-laden from the Queen Mother, of whom all had heard from childhood. The 5 gems were laid, each in a covered casket of perfumed wood, encrusted with gold on top and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Escorted into the throne room by a bevy of princesses, the Heavenly Mother's gifts in the 5 caskets were reverently placed on silken fans, spread out on a table having on its top the 5 cushions of crimson velvet. Then, by lot and word of the diviners, the choice of a first drawing was awarded to a prince of fair face and mien. The other four nobles, one by one and in turn, approached, and each was allowed to choose one of the caskets, all of which looked alike, and none was to be opened until the possessor was in his own home. Now these were the gifts for body and mind, of which the polished gems were the tokens. According as each prince chose and received, so with the trait which each gem signified would his children and posterity be endowed. In the course of centuries, these would become the national features of 20 millions of Koreans. One by one the caskets were opened by each prince, and therein he discovered what was a trait in the character of the Korean people. These were procrastination, putting off until tomorrow or some other time what ought to be done today, and keeping back not only one person but the whole nation. Hospitality. Always glad to see friends, to entertain people, even strangers, and to take care of relations, even to the making of one's self poor, a habit carried too far as the years and centuries rolled on. Inexactness, the habit of not usually thinking clearly, counting correctly, or stating facts precisely, and when telling a story of blowing a conch, that is, of exaggerating. Love of family. How the mothers and fathers in Korea do love their children, their kinsfolk, and their relatives. Sense of humor. A Korean can always see the funny side of things. He loves to joke, and he bears his troubles well because he likes to smile. As for the girls, they laugh as easily as the rain falls or the flowers bloom. And what the Queen Mother predicted came true. Just as 5 fingers make up the hand, so the average people among the Koreans are known by the 5 traits, for better or for worse. The magic peach. Out on the ocean, so far away that no ship ever sailed there, is an island on which stood the 7-storied palace of the royal lady, Su Wang Mu. In our language, this title means Western Queen Mother. She is always ready to help good mortals with her gifts and favors. On this island, thousands of genii wait to obey the commands of the Queen Mother. She has also chariots of silver and gold drawn by dragons, by which she sends her messages everywhere. The genii and most of the shining maidens stay at home to fulfill the Queen's commands. In addition to these servants, she has hundreds of azure pigeons, which she often dispatches to far-off places. In their bills or under their wings, they carry some gift or promise to make people happy. In the mind of many a Korean maiden there rises the dream, or there wells up the hope, that someday the Western Queen Mother will send to her pretty clothes of silk, with necklaces of jewels, a handsome youth to wed her, and a silver ring for the marriage ceremony. Then she pictures to herself how splendidly she will be arrayed, and how fine she will look in the costume of a bride, how her long black hair will be done up very high, with flowers and rosettes over the crown of her head, and ermine-edged slippers will be put on her feet. She wonders how she will feel when she drinks the cups of sacramental wine that make her a wife, after which she will go with her husband and bow to the memorial tablets of his ancestors. She goes all over in her mind the happy time she will have in her husband's home. What she hopes for most after all these things is to have a kind mother-in-law. Then she will be a queen in her own little kingdom, with plenty of rice and kimchi and cakes and goodies. So it is that many Korean maidens go out under the blue sky to look up at the stars, or on moonlight nights scan the heavens to see if the birds are coming. Hoping to greet the azure pigeons, they put on their best clothes and watch. Many are their dreams. Oh, how many lads also dream of the genii and of the riding on the dragon's back, to cross the mountain ranges and the great oceans, and to visit strange, far-off countries, or they think of the pink coat which they will wear. The pink coat shows that the lad is engaged to be married and will, when grown up, be a husband to the little girl who may be in her cradle days. For in Korea, children and even babies in arms are engaged to be married to other children. Then the boy pictures the day when the long braid of hair which he now has to wear down his back shall be tucked up into a topknot like a man's. No matter how old a bachelor may be, he must wear this boy's braid of hair. He must not speak or talk with his elders without, and everyone treats him as a child. So the boy also waits for the azure pigeons to come, for to be engaged to be married even when quite young, or to have a wife when older, means a great deal. Then the young husband will wear a wide-brimmed hat after school and go up to the city with his fellow villagers to try at the literary examinations. They will all march together under a banner tufted at the top with pheasant feathers. If he passes successfully, he will be welcomed home with a parade and band of music. By and by, he will become a magistrate and have a string of amber beads over his ear and wear on his breast a square of gold-embroidered velvet. Servants will carry him in a palanquin, and his men will carry wooden paddles to punish folks who break the laws. Then he can strut about in starched white flowing clothes, with the common people all afraid of him. No wonder that the boy waits for the coming of the blue pigeon. Now in the gardens of the Queen's palace on the island of Gems, there grow wonderful fruits of a rich, ripe color, brilliant with light and sheen. These, when served at the banquets and eaten, have the power of making the guest live very long, even for thousands of years. Especially powerful is the celestial peach of longevity, which is served on little golden tables. Its juice makes an old person's body new, so that one who eats the peach will live hundreds of years. Sometimes the queen sends one of these fruits to her favorites on the earth. Yet no one can ever get any of these peaches, unless the queen herself gives them, and the peach trees are always jealously guarded by genii and dragons. None, even of the queen's servants, or her waiting maids, or any of the genii or dragons, can bestow the peach of longevity on mortals. Now it happened that the queen, hearing of the virtues of a certain king's son, dispatched one of her lovely maidens in one of her 10,000 dragon chariots, inviting him to visit her majesty in the island of Gems. She sent a message also to the prince's parents, telling them that their son would return before the end of the moon, which was then in its first quarter. His anxious mother, who had a bride already picked out for her son to wed, warned him against looking too long at the lovely princesses or pretty maids in the queen's palace of gems. In truth, she had her lurking suspicions. She feared for her darling son that beneath their rosy faces and moon-like eyes they were really sirens, possibly even sea monsters in female form, and might eat him up. She also urged him to be very careful as to etiquette. He must be especially decorous, because the code of behavior and manners might not be the same as those among polite people upon the earth. Moreover, he must notice and hear everything, and, when he came back home, tell her all about it. On the other hand, the queen of the island of Gems warned the lovely maiden, a princess whom she sent, to beware lest the prince might fall in love with her, either on the way or when at the island. If he tried to persuade her to marry him and to stay on the earth and not come back to the island of Gems and to her duties to the queen, the palace maid would be disgraced and die early. Although the queen laughed when she said it and quoted the proverb, "Don't trust a pigeon to carry grain," she was really very serious, and the maiden knew that it would not do to thwart the royal wishes. So this discreet princess made a firm resolve to be very careful. She decided that when she met the prince she would be very cold in her bearing. When delivering the queen's invitation, she would appear to think it only a matter of business, though very important. She would not stay more than an hour in the prince's mansion. When the dragon chariot was returning homeward, she would be silent. She would hold no conversation, nor speak a word, nor let the prince sit beside her, but she would keep in the front seat nearest the dragon, while he should ride on the great creature's back. So it was a very quiet journey which the prince made, while the chariot sped over the clouds, with the earth and oceans lying far beneath. Part of the time he sat on the dragon's back, as if in a saddle, but after a while he climbed back into the chariot again, and all the time he was so thrilled with the speed and the grandeur of it all that, to tell the truth, he forgot all about the lovely princess who had brought the queen's message, until he found himself at the queen's palace of gems and was invited to step out of the chariot. Soon he was seated with others, similarly honored, at the table which was loaded down with dishes of gold and silver which were heaped with the choicest viands. The guests, all in fine clothes like the prince, were waited on by shining maidens of exquisite beauty, and robed in golden garments gemmed with glittering jewels of the most precious workmanship. Upon one of these lovely creatures, a maiden who seemed to be about 16, not far away from where he sat, the prince cast his eyes. She was kneeling on the floor, ready to do his bidding. He was so filled with admiration at her loveliness that he could hardly pay any attention to the talk at the table. Despite his mother's warning, he made several mistakes in propriety. Yet his appetite was very good after his long journey, and he ate heartily of the delicious fare. Towards the end of the feast, feeling in a jolly mood, he picked up one of the peaches. Then he pared and sliced it, greatly enjoying its juicy nectar. Every morsel of the pulp as he put it in his mouth made him feel as if he were gaining a century of vigor. He knew he was lengthening his life and increasing his power to enjoy the pleasures of which he had always been very fond. Indeed, the prince was far less of a scholar and student than he ought to have been. Often at home, when his teachers were all present and ready to begin the tasks of the day, the lad was still out at play. His older sister used to say laughingly of her brother, "He never let his studies interfere with his education." Yet every moment this maiden kneeling near him seemed to grow more charming in both face and form, dress and adornment, ease and grace of motion. Indeed, she seemed the very embodiment of all loveliness, and the prince could not keep his eyes off her. He did not know that this was the effect of eating the peach of longevity, for the maiden was really no prettier at the end of the banquet than she had been at the beginning. The change was in him, not in her. So intoxicated was the prince that he so far forgot himself and what his mother had told him not to do, that he picked out one of the finest looking of the peaches from its golden basket on the table and tossed it over to the pretty maiden. On her part, the maid of honor had herself been so wrapped up in admiration of the young and princely guest that when he motioned that he was about to toss a peach to her, she broke the rule of the palace of gems. She threw out her hands and caught the peach deftly, as if playing ball. The palace ladies were all horrified. They had been taught that, except to perform the duties of waiting and serving, they were to pay no attention to anything the guests might say or do. When heated with wine, the guests might be only making sport of the attendants. They were to decline any personal attentions and continue in their duty of serving. But instead of averting her gaze or bowing low with her face to the ground or having her eyes downcast, the maid actually threw out her hands, caught the peach, and, to the horror of all who saw her, bit into it and swallowed the morsel. What it was that happened the very next moment even the fairies could not tell or exactly remember, for a golden mist seemed to fall in the banquet hall, enveloping everything. It happens that just here in the story a great gap occurs. At such a pause, the Korean storyteller, who sits in his booth in one of the back streets of Seoul, would stop and send his boy to take up a collection from the crowd. Nor would he go on until all had been invited to give and the coins rattled in the gourd shell. When he began again, some said it was the same story continued. Others were sure it was a new story, but that the palace maid and the prince were the same who had been in the banquet hall of the Western Queen Mother. in the island of gems, and that the peach had never lost, since it never could lose its virtues, because given by the queen. But such as it was, this is the way the story ran on. More than 1,000 years afterwards, it was known that in the high mountains of the ever-white range lived a holy man, a hermit, who was honored, almost worshipped by the people in that region. In the summertime, hundreds of pilgrims visited his hut to hear wise words about how to live and do good, and then to receive the hermit's blessing. Even the wild beasts appeared to be tame in his presence. At any rate, they never tried to bite or devour one another, or hurt the old man, or to destroy his humble shelter. The tigers, the leopards, and the bears seemed to forget they had claws or teeth, while their little cubs played peacefully with each other. The dress of this hermit was of the ancient style of 1,000 years before, of the time of the ancient dynasty of Ko. One day, while out on one of his walks, this old white-bearded hermit met a woman of fair countenance who seemed to be quite young, for her face was unwrinkled and rosy. It appeared that she had traveled far, yet she walked with the springing step of a maiden who was still in her teens. Her dress betokened that of ages gone, for it was of the sort and fashion which are revealed in the cave pictures painted on the walls of the dolmens, or the colossal stone chambers in which kings and mighty men were buried 10 or 15 centuries ago, which are very many in Korea. The hermit and maid met in the path under the tall pine tree and exchanged greetings, the lady bowing very low. Then, as she looked up in his eyes, her face became radiant with joy, as if she recognized a dear friend. The sage inquired who she was and whether she were the wandering lady, of whom rumor spoke of having been seen during centuries over all the 9 provinces of Korea by people who were great-grandfathers, as well as by the children of that day. Then she told her story. She was the same palace maid who, in the Western Queen Mother's palace on the island of Gems, had waited upon him, once a gay prince and now the holy hermit. Then again she bowed low, for catching and eating the peach which the princely guest had tossed to her, and thus breaking the rules of the palace, the queen had ordered her banishment for 1,000 years. But during all this time she had been seeking the prince who tossed her the peach of longevity, for she knew that neither she nor he could die till the 1,000 years had passed. Yet none of the men she met, however handsome, learned, or wealthy, reached her ideal of the youth she had seen so long ago. Not finding him, she went back to the island of Gems, traveling on a dragon's back, and humbly begged the queen to extend her term of life until she should meet the one she loved so dearly, even if she found him only after hundreds of years more of wandering and of hope deferred. The mother queen listened to her petition and was gracious and extended the maiden's life. So on the earth she kept up her wanderings. Now, having met the holy hermit, she was happy, for she felt sure that she had found the same prince, venerable in appearance though he was, for she could see his soul. The hermit listened with delight to the lady's story of her life in the palace and of her wanderings during 1,000 years in search of one she loved, and, especially, that she had been willing to have the mother queen order her future. As for the hermit, his long white beard which swept his breast fell off, his bald head was in a moment covered with luxuriant black hair, and he became young again in her presence, with springing step and bright eyes. He could not be more rosy in countenance, for the pure life he had led had kept his skin pink. They spent many hours together in talking long and joyfully over their experiences in the island of Gems. Then both agreed that now, since they had met again, they would bow gladly to the queen's decision concerning them both, and do whatever her majesty ordered. But already by a flying dragon that was famous for gathering up news from all parts of the universe, the queen had been told of the meeting of the lovers in the mountain path, and of their pious resolve to commit their future to her majesty in the island of Gems. Suddenly the pair of lovers heard near the mountain top a sound of sweet music, as of some fairy playing on a lute, and at every second the sound seemed to come lower and nearer. Soon a great white cloud of sweet-smelling odors like incense enveloped them. What was their surprise to see a golden chariot drawn by 2 dragons whose eyes were like emeralds come up close to where they stood. Both of them, Prince Hermit and Maid, were then taken up into the chariot and borne swiftly over cloud and mountain and sea to the island of gems. There the queen ordered them to be married, and, after a splendid wedding, they lived happily ever after. The Great Stone Fire Eater. Ages ago there lived a great fire spirit inside of a mountain to the southwest of Seoul, the capital of Korea. He was always hungry, and his food was anything that would burn. He devoured trees, forests, dry grass, wood, and whatever he could get hold of. When those were not within his reach, he ate stones and rocks. He enjoyed the flames, but threw the hard stuff out of his mouth in the form of lava. This fire monster spent most of his time in a huge volcano some distance away, but in sight of the capital. The city people used to watch the smoke coming out of the crater by day and issuing in red fire between sunset and sunrise, until all the heavens seemed in flames. Then, they said, the fire spirit was lighting up his palace. On cloudy nights, the inside of the volcano glowed like a furnace. The molten mass inside the crater was reflected on the clouds, so that one could almost see into the monster's belly. But nothing tasted so good to the fire eater as things which men built, such as houses, stables, fences, and general property. And a special titbit that he longed to swallow was the royal palace. Looking out of its crater one day, he saw the king's palace, all silver bright and brand new, rising in the city of Seoul. Thereupon he chuckled and said to himself, for he was very happy, "There's a feast for me. I'll just walk out of my mountain home and eat up that dainty morsel. I wonder how the king will like it." But the fire spirit was in no hurry. He felt sure of his meal, so he waited until his friend, the south wind, was prepared to join him. "Let me know when you're ready," said the fire spirit to the south wind, "and we'll have a splendid blaze. We'll go up at night and enjoy a lively dance before they can get a drop of water on us. Don't let the rain clouds know anything about our picnic." The south wind promised easily, for she was always glad to have a frolic. So when the sun went down and it was dark, the fire spirit climbed out of his rocky home in the volcano and strode towards Seoul. The south wind pranced and capered with him until the streets of the capital were so gusty that no one with a wide-brimmed hat dared go outdoors, lest, in a lively puff, he might lose his headgear. As for the men in mourning, who wear straw hats a yardstick wide and as big and deep as washtubs, they locked themselves up at home and played checkers. By the time all the palace guards were asleep, the fire spirit was ready. He said to the south wind, "Blow, blow your biggest blast as I begin to touch the roofs of the smaller houses. This will whet my appetite for the palace, and then together we'll eat them all up." Not till they heard a mighty roar and crackling did the people in Seoul push back their paper windows to find out what was the matter. Oh, what a blaze! It seemed to mount to heaven with red tongues that licked the stars. Those who could see in the direction of the palace supposed the sun had risen, but soon the crash of falling roofs and mighty columns of smoke and flame with clouds of sparks told the terrible story. By the time the sun did rise, there was nothing but a level waste of ashes where the large buildings had been. Even the smoke had been driven away by the wind. When the king and his people in the palace enclosure, who had saved their lives by running fast, thought over their loss, they began to plan how to stop the fire monster when he should take it into his head to saunter forth on another walk and gobble up the king's dwelling. A council of wise men was called to decide upon the question. Many long heads were bowed in hard thought over the matter. All the firemen, stone-cutters, fortune-tellers, dragon-tamers, geomancers, and people skilled in preventing conflagrations were invited to give their advice about the best way to fight the hungry fire demon. After weeks spent in pondering the problem, they all agreed that a dragon from China should be brought over to Korea. If kept in a swamp and fed well, he would surely prevent the fire imp from rambling too near Seoul. Besides, the dragon knew how to amuse and persuade the south wind not to join in the mischief. So, at tremendous cost and trouble, one of China's biggest dragons, capable of making rain and of spouting tons of water on its enemies, was shipped over and kept in a swamp. It was honored with a royal decoration, allowed to wear a string of amber beads over its ear, given a horsehair hat, a nobleman's girdle, and fed all the turnips it desired to eat. In every way it was treated as the king's favorite. But it was all in vain. Money and favor were alike wasted. The petted dragon made it rain too often so that the land was soaked. Then, when told not to do this, it grew sulky and neglected its duty. Finally, it became fat and lazy, and one night fell asleep when it ought to have been on guard, for the winds were out on a dance. Seeing his jailer thus caught napping, the fire imp leaped out of its volcano prison, rode quickly on the south wind to Seoul, and in a few hours had again swallowed the royal palace. There was nothing seen next day except ashes, which the fire monster cared no more for than we for nutshells when the kernels are eaten up. With big tears in their eyes, the king and his wise men met together again to decide on a new scheme to keep off the fire imp. They were ready to drown him or to see him get eaten up, because he had twice swallowed up the palace. They sent the Chinese dragon home, and this time, besides the fortune-tellers and the stone-cutters, the well-diggers were invited also. For many days the wise men studied maps, talked of geography, looked at mountains, valleys, and the volcano, and studied air currents. Finally, one man, famous for his deep learning about wood and water, forests and rivers, spoke thus: "It is evident that the fire has always come from the southwest, and up this valley," pointing to a map. "True, true," shouted all the wise men. "Well, right in his path let us dig a big pond, a regular artificial lake, and very deep, into which the fire monster will tumble. This will put him out, and he can get no further." "Agreed, agreed," shouted the wise men in chorus. "Why did we not think of this before?" All the skillful diggers of wells and ditches were summoned to the capital. With shovel and spade they worked for weeks. Then they let in water from the river until the pond was full. So everybody in Seoul went to bed thinking that the king's palace was now safe, surely. But the fire imp, seeing the dragon gone and his opportunity come, climbed out of his volcano and moved out for another meal. This time the south wind was busy elsewhere and could not go with him. So he went alone, but coming to the pond, tumbled and wet himself so badly that he was chilled and nearly put out when he got to the palace, which was only half burned. So he went home growling and hungry. Again the wise men were called, and the first thing they did was to thank the boss well-digger who had made the pond. The king summoned him into his presence to confer rank upon him and his children. He was presented with 4 rolls of silk, 40 pounds of white ginseng, a tiger-skin robe, 60 dried chestnuts, and 44 strings of copper cash. Loaded with such Korean wealth and honors, the man fell on his hands and knees and thanked his majesty profusely. Then they called the master stonecutter or chief of the guild and asked him if he could chisel out the figure of a beast that could eat flames and be ugly enough to scare away the fire imp. The master had long hoped that he would be invited to rear this bit of sculpture, but hitherto the king and court had feared it might cost too much. So the order was given, and out of the heart of the mountains a mighty block of white granite was loosed and brought to Seoul on rollers, pushed, pulled, and hoisted by thousands of laborers. Then, hidden behind canvas to keep the matter secret, lest the fire imp should find it out, the workmen toiled. Hammers and chisels clinked until on a certain day the great stone flame-eater was ready to take his permanent seat in front of the palace gate as guardian of the royal buildings and treasures. The fire imp laughed when the south wind told him of what the Koreans in the capital were doing, even though she warned him of the danger of his being eaten up. "I shall walk out and see for myself anyhow," said the fire imp. One night he crept out quietly and moved toward the city. He was nearly drowned in the pond, but plucking up courage he went on until he was near the king's dwelling. Hearing the fire imp coming, the great flame-eater turned his head and licked his chops in anticipation of swallowing the fire imp whole, as a toad does a fly. But one sight of the hideous stony monster was enough for the fire imp. There before him on a high pedestal was something never before seen in heaven or on earth. It had enormous fireproof scales like a salamander with curly hair like asbestos, and its mouth was full of big fangs. It was altogether hideous enough to give even a volcano spirit a chill. "Just think of those jaws snapping on me," said the fire imp to himself as he looked at them and the fangs. "I do believe that creature is half alligator and half water tortoise. I had better go home. No dinner this time." So by his freezing glance alone, the great flame-eater frightened away the fire imp, so that he never came again, and the royal palace was not once burned. Today the ugly brute still keeps watch. You have only to look at him to enjoy this story. Pigling and her proud sister. Pearblossom had been the name of a little Korean maid who was suddenly left motherless. When her father, Kung Wha, who was a magistrate high in office, married again, he took for his wife a proud widow whose daughter, born to Kung Wha, was named Violet. Mother and daughter hated housework and made Pearblossom clean the rice, cook the food, and attend to the fire in the kitchen. They were hateful in their treatment of Pearblossom, and, besides never speaking a kind word, called her Pigling or Little Pig, which made the girl weep often. It did no good to complain to her father, for he was always busy. He smoked his yard-long pipe and played checkers hour by hour, apparently caring more about having his great white coat properly starched and lustered than for his daughter to be happy. His linen had to be beaten with a laundry club until it glistened like hoar-frost, and, except his wide-brimmed black horsehair hat, he looked immaculately white when he went out of the house to the government office. Poor Pigling had to perform this task of washing, starching, and glossing, in addition to the kitchen work, and the rat-tat-tat of her laundry stick was often heard in the outer room till after midnight, when her heartless stepsister and mother had long been asleep. There was to be a great festival in the city, and for many days preparations were made in the house to get the father ready in his best robe and hat, and the women in their finery, to go out and see the king and the royal procession. Poor Pigling wanted very much to have a look at the pageant, but the cruel stepmother, setting before her a huge straw bag of unhulled rice and a big cracked water jar, told her she must husk all the rice, and, drawing water from the well, fill the crock to the brim before she dared to go out on the street. What a task to hull with her fingers 3 bushels of rice and fill up a leaky vessel! Pigling wept bitterly. How could it ever be done? While she was brooding thus and opening the straw bag to begin spreading the rice out on mats, she heard a whir and a rush of wings, and down came a flock of pigeons. They first lighted on her head and shoulders, and then hopping to the floor began diligently with beak and claw, and in a few minutes the rice lay in a heap, clean, white, and glistening, while with their pink toes they pulled away the hulls and put these in a separate pile. Then, after a great chattering and cooing, the flock was off and away. Pigling was so amazed at this wonderful work of the birds that she scarcely knew how to be thankful enough. But alas, there was still the cracked crock to be filled. Just as she took hold of the bucket to begin, there crawled out of the fire-hole a sooty black imp named Tokgabi. "Don't cry," he squeaked out. "I'll mend the broken part and fill the big jar for you." Forthwith he stopped up the crack with clay, and pouring a dozen buckets of water from the well into the crock, it was filled to brimming, and the water spilled over on all sides. Then Tokgabi the imp bowed and crawled into the flues again, before the astonished girl could thank her helper. So Pigling had time to dress in her plain but clean clothes that were snow white. She went off and saw the royal banners and the king's grand procession of thousands of loyal men. The next time, the stepmother and her favorite daughter planned a picnic on the mountain. So the refreshments were prepared, and Pigling had to work hard in starching the dresses to be worn, jackets, long skirts, belts, sashes, and whatnot, until she nearly dropped with fatigue. Yet instead of thanking and cheering her, the cruel stepmother told Pigling she must not go out until she had hoed all the weeds out of the garden and pulled up all the grass between the stones of the walk. Again the poor girl's face was wet with tears. She was left at home alone while the others went off in fine clothes, with plenty to eat and drink, for a day of merrymaking. While weeping thus, a huge black cow came along, and out of its great liquid eyes seemed to beam compassion upon the kitchen slave. Then, in 10 mouthfuls, the animal ate up the weeds, and, between its hoof and lips, soon made an end of the grass in the stone pathway. With her tears dried, Pigling followed this wonderful brute out over the meadows into the woods, where she found the most delicious fruit her eyes ever rested upon. She tasted and enjoyed, feasting to the full, and then returned home. When the jealous stepsister heard of the astonishing doings of the black cow, she determined to enjoy a feast in the forest also. So on the next gala day she stayed home and let the kitchen drudge go to see the royal parade. Pigling could not understand why she was excused, even for a few hours, from the pots and kettles, but she was still more surprised by the gift from her stepmother of a rope of cash to spend for dainties. Gratefully thanking the woman, she put on her best clothes and was soon on the main street of the city, enjoying the gay sights and looking at the happy people. There were tightrope dancing, music with drum and flute by bands of strolling players, tricks by conjurers and mountebanks, with mimicking and castanets, posturing by the singing girls, and fun of all sorts. Boys peddling honey, candy, barley, sugar, and sweetmeats were out by the dozen. At the eating house, Pigling had a good dinner of fried fish, boiled rice with red peppers, turnips, dried persimmons, roasted chestnuts, and candied orange, and felt as happy as a queen. The selfish stepsister had stayed home, not to relieve Pigling of work, but to see the wonderful cow. So, when the black animal appeared and found its friend gone, and with nothing to do, it went off into the forest. The stepsister at once followed in the tracks of the cow, but the animal took it into its head to go very fast, and into unpleasant places. Soon the girl found herself in a swamp, wet, miry, and full of brambles. Still hoping for wonderful fruit, she kept on until she was tired out and the cow was no longer to be seen. Then, muddy and bedraggled, she tried to go back, but the thorny bushes tore her clothes, spoiled her hands, and so scratched her face that when at last, nearly dead, she got home, she was in rags and her beauty was gone. But Pigling, rosy and round, looked so lovely that a young man from the south, of good family and at that time visiting the capital, was struck with her beauty. And as he wanted a wife, he immediately sought to find out where she lived. Then he secured a go-between who visited both families and made all the arrangements for the betrothal and marriage. Grand was the wedding. The groom, Suen, was dressed in white and black silk robes with a rich horsehair cap and headdress denoting his rank as a yangban, or gentleman. On his breast, crossed by a silver-studded girdle, was a golden square embroidered with flying cranes rising above the waves, the symbols of civil office. He was tall, handsome, richly cultured, and quite famous as a writer of verses, besides being well read in the classics. Charming indeed looked Pear Blossom, as she was now called again, in her robe of brocade and long undersleeves which extended from her inner dress of snow-white silk. Dainty were her red kid shoes, curved upward at the toes. with a baldric of open-worked silver, a high-waisted long skirt with several linings of her inner silk robes showing prettily at the neck, and the silver bridle ring on her finger. She looked as lovely as a princess. Besides her bridal dower, her father asked Pear Blossom what she preferred as a special present. When she told him, he laughed heartily. Nevertheless, he fulfilled her wishes, and to this day, in the boudoir of Pear Blossom, now Mrs. Suen, there stands an earthen figure of a black cow molded and baked from the clay of her home province, while the pigeons like to hover about a pear tree that bursts into bloom every springtime and sheds on the ground a snowy shower of fragrant petals. The mirror that made trouble. The city of Seoul lies near the Han River, which flows all the way across Korea from the high mountains to the level sea. To most Korean people, in the old days when no one traveled abroad, Seoul was the center of the universe. All roads in the kingdom led to this wonderful city, in which there were big shops and stores, and gay streets full of lively people in rich clothing. The gentlemen in their stiffly starched and glistening white clothes walked very proudly with their heads up in the air. When they straddled the little Korean ponies, which are not much bigger than Newfoundland dogs, it seemed as if elephants were trying to ride on donkeys. From morning to night, the avenues were full of traffic and business. All the wonderful things brought by the Arabs from India and by the merchants from Japan and China could be bought in the Korean capital. 1,000 bulls loaded with dry grass and firewood came through the city gates into Seoul every day. They could be seen passing along, but not much besides. Legs, tail, and horns were visible. At breakfast and supper time, clouds of blue smoke rose up from 10,000 low, and often underground chimneys carrying the heat and fire from the kitchens where good things to eat were cooked. The cartloads of bags of rice, millet, barley, fruits and vegetables, goodies and cookies, jars and crockery, seen in the shops, would make a mountain. Palaces, pagodas, temples, and mansions of the nobles and wealthy people made the place in which the king lived very beautiful, while out beyond were the high stone city walls, white or covered with vines. When the sun dipped below the mountains, the gates were shut, and after that no one could enter until morning. At every closing and opening of the gates, the musicians played lively tunes, and the great bell tolled out the time of sunrise and sunset. In the band were drums, fifes, trumpets, and stringed instruments. At night, from inside the house and wine shops, one could hear the sounds of revelry, music, song, dancing, and feasting, which often lasted till morning. Out on the great South Mountain a mighty fire burned, and the flames shot high up in the air. This was the welcome message that all was peaceful throughout the whole kingdom. On hilltop and mountain, from the snowy peaks of the ever-white mountain to the islands out in the southern sea, and from the east to the west coast, these signal fires blaze. Flame answering flame made a telegraph announcing that all was well. But at 9 o'clock, Seoul outdoors was a woman's city. All boys and men must be off the streets. Any male person caught by the police would be taken to the magistrate's office and there receive a severe beating with wooden paddles by the public spankers. Then the women and grown-up girls, old and young, went outdoors, breathed the air, took their walks, made their visits, and had a delightful time with play and chat and gossip. But by midnight everyone must be indoors. It was no wonder, then, that in the country the farmers and the village folk thought that Seoul, the capital, was the most splendid city on earth. If they ever heard of London and Paris and New York, they supposed that these places on the map were only villages. How was it possible that any city could equal or surpass Seoul? Why, the very idea was nonsense. In every hamlet, even the children hoped some day to see the city. Often they dreamed of riding through the air on a dragon's back in order to get there. It was thought that anything which a mortal man or even the insatiable Tokgabi should require could be bought in Seoul. Now, in a village up north, which in English we should call Cucumberville, lived a miller, Mr. Kim, and his wife Cho. The man had worked hard for many years and heaped up piles of iron and brass cash, which he kept hidden under a rafter beneath the roof. He had long intended to see the royal city, and his wife encouraged him, for she wanted a new dress and a comb and a pair of shoes, such as city people wear. His daughters said they would like to have girdles, ermine-trimmed slippers, and silver hairpins. Kim felt that he must surely go to please both himself and his family. So one fine May morning he started off to walk to Seoul and see the sights. His wife and daughters, bowing down with their faces to the paper carpet, begged him to bring them the pretty things they talked about so much, and also whatever might please himself. His faithful spouse bade him beware of thieves and robbers, and not to let his money lie around loose in the inns by the way. When in Seoul, he must not go into the wine shops, or to see the dancing girls called jesang or geisha, or to spend his cash foolishly. There were many wicked men about, and she had heard that beside the polite people there were boors even in the capital. This she thought must surely be the fact, for there was a proverb that said so. On his part, Kim cautioned his wife, since it was still chilly weather, to keep the kitchen fires burning so as to have the house warm and not let the girls take cold. She must beware also of robbers. These bad men had the habit of coming after midnight, when the fire was out, and of quietly loosening the stones of the foundations under the floor and getting inside, and also into the rooms through the flues. The house must be well locked up and the door barricaded at night so that no prowling leopard or tiger roaming around should get in. If she heard any scratching or clawing on the roof, she was to strike the gong. This would alarm the villagers, and then the men would rush out with torches and drive off the beasts of prey. If she should hear the pigs squealing out in the pen, she must sound the alarm, for the tigers loved Korean pork even more than Korean people. Now, Kim was a first-rate fellow. When at home he was pretty sharp at a bargain while buying beans, millet, or rice, and was skillful in grinding barley or chopping up straw for the donkeys. But when he was once inside the walls of the big city, one would think he carried his head under his armpits, as the Koreans say, for amid so many strange sights and sounds he was dazed. Like a great gawk, he stood on the main street with his mouth open. As the crowds went by, he wondered where all the people came from and how they all got a living. He found the saying true that there are rude people even in Seoul, for one fellow shouted at him, asking him whether he intended to swallow the moon. Some of the boys laughed at him, and one said his mouth was like a bird box, and something might fly in. Kim looked at many things in the shops, but when he asked how much they cost, he nearly fainted. He was truly scared at the price, and walked on. However, he bought some pretty things for his wife and daughters, such as a fan, a roll of silk for a dress, a box of hairpins, some amber beads, and a silver ring, so that when his oldest daughter, who was soon to marry, became a bride, she would have everything ready. While in the silk shop, the clerk who sold him the goods saw that Kim was from the country and thought he would have a little fun. So he told Kim about the fairies and pointed out a shop across the way. There, if he looked at the round thing which the shopman would gladly show him, he would see and feel as he never felt or saw before. At once Kim went across the street and over to the shop where they made metal things, bright, shining, polished, and silvery. There he stood in front of a round thing like the moon. In it was a man's face. It was the face of someone he thought he knew. It was a man about his own age, he fancied, yet he could not tell just who it was or call him by name, but he was sure he had seen the person before. When he turned around suddenly, hoping to surprise a friend and perhaps a neighbor from his hometown, there was nobody near. He looked again. There it was. Had his friend hid himself and then come back? When Kim dodged, he lost sight of the face, but when standing in front of this round thing, there was the same man again in the mirror, for that is what the shining metal was. When Kim laughed, the fellow laughed too. When he made a wry face or grimaces, the other person, whoever he was, did the same. No matter how quickly Kim might turn around to catch him, he was gone. Now Kim had never before seen a mirror and did not know what it might be, yet thinking it was almost like fairy magic, he bought the metal disc and took it back with him. When he arrived home, he must first of all unpack the boxes containing the pretty things for the women of his family, for the girls were impatient to see what their father had brought them. They were so absorbed in their gifts that they did not notice what Mr. Kim had bought for himself. So he laid the case containing the mirror on the table and put some other purchases away in the big cabinet inlaid with mother-of-pearl that stood in the best room. Then he went out to look after his mill, and the pigs, the donkey, and the bull. No sooner had the girls opened the mirror case than terrible things happened. The mother, who was behind the daughter, saw the face of a young woman and was startled at beholding a stranger, as she thought, in her house. Instantly she broke out in a fit of jealous passion. "Your father has brought home another woman, a gay sang from Seoul, to take my place. What does he mean?" At the same time the daughter, seeing a face in the polished metal, cried out, "No, mother, we won't have any strange woman in your place. Besides, she's too young and will be a tyrant to us." Hearing the loud voices and crying, the grandmother hobbled in and asked what was the matter. "Look, see for yourself what our daddy has brought home to us to make us miserable." Seeing the mirror, Granny looked into it for a moment. Then she too burst into a passion and cried out, "I won't have this old woman in our house. It's enough for my son to support me and his family." Oh, why did he go to Seoul? By this time there was such a racket with 4 women, young, middle-aged, and old, crying so lustily that each one quickly used up 3 paper handkerchiefs apiece before they could dry their tears, while still crying out, "Ugo! Ugo!" Very loudly grandfather came in, shaking his stick and ordering them to be quiet. Then, looking at their streaming faces and dropping tears, he demanded to know the cause of the trouble. "See for yourself," said his wife. Then she handed him the metal troublemaker, such as had never before been seen in the village. At once the old man turned almost purple with rage. "What?" cried he in his cracked voice. "Is my son so unfilial as to bring another old man into the house? How can he support 2 fathers? Where will he get the kimchi and millet for the old fellow to eat?" Then he threw the mirror into its box and slammed down the lid tight. All this time, while jealousy was eating up these angry people and threatening to disrupt the family, the noise increased so greatly that the husband left his pigs and his mill and rushed in to see what was the matter. At once his wife, who was a very strong woman, flew at him, and seizing his topknot, pulled him and dragged him over the floor and outdoors, and along into the street, never stopping till she reached the house of the judge to tell her troubles. There she made out a terrible story. Once, in the presence of the great man who wore a mighty hat and had a string of amber beads hung over his ear, she told the story of what her husband had brought from Seoul to destroy the peace of his family. Surely he meant to go back to the capital and have a young wife. In her anger, her tongue never stopped a moment. She charged her husband with all the crimes known in the codes. Yet all that she could prove against him was that he had brought something round, made of metal, into the house. She assured the judge that it was as full of evil magic as Togabi and all his imps. Now the other members of the family joined in accusation of the miller. Besides supporting the wife's story, they all declared that it was true in every detail, because the 5 witnesses all agreed in their story. When the flood of talk had subsided somewhat, the judge, who meanwhile had kept on smoking a brass-bowled pipe, the stem of which was a yard long, while the bowl was only as big as a chestnut, asked, "In what form did you say this evil magic came?" At this, the miller's old father produced the box, opened it, and handed the metal mirror to the judge, who had never before seen anything like it. In fact, he had never been out of his district except once, when he went to the examinations years before in Seoul. Even then he was so much with his fellow students and so long shut up in his little cell writing out his essays that he saw hardly anything of the city. When he held up the mirror before his eyes, he suddenly became like a demon in his rage and behaved just like the other people in the courtroom. On the face of the round thing which he held in his hand, he saw a man in official robes, such as only men of eminence wear. He had on his head a high round hat, like those which only magistrates ever put on, while on his right ear hung a string of 28 big round amber beads. When he held the mirror down in front of him, he discerned also the embroidered breastpiece and the little silver stork that served to hold together the folds of a judge's coat of office, while around his waist was a decorated girdle. All this made him almost choke with anger at the idea that another magistrate should come into the village of Cucumberville to take his place. What should he himself do for a salary? If he lost his position, how would he support his old parents and his 25 poor relations? He saw himself a pauper in his old age. Speechless with rage, there was silence in the courtroom for at least half a minute. Even the women's tongues did not wag. All looked at each other to see what would come next. But the peace lasted no longer than 30 seconds, for the storm broke out again in full force when the jealous wife seized her husband by his topknot to drag him home. She feared that the magistrate was himself so angry and jealous that he might adjourn the court. Just when the hullabaloo was at its height, a messenger rushed into the courtroom to announce that the royal inspector direct from the king was on his travels of observation in the province. Within 5 minutes he would be at the gate of the courthouse. Instantly the jealous wife let go her husband's topknot. The magistrate called for order and posted his under-officers in their places, according to the etiquette of welcoming the king's agents. Then the magistrate, adjusting his hat and topknot, which had been badly tumbled in his passion, went out to greet his worship, the royal inspector. Salutations over, he waved his hand to his superior to take to the chief seat of honor. As soon as all formalities were over, the high officer inquired into the cause of the troubles and into the merits of the case. The local magistrate put them nearer on a silken cushion and handed both to His Highness the inspector, saying, "Please, your worship, it is this that has turned us all into devils of jealousy." "What is it?" Then this gentleman from the capital, who was every day accustomed to the comforts and conveniences of the great city and the splendor of the palace, explained what a mirror was. He gave them all a mild scolding for their folly and dismissed them, telling them that whenever he or she felt angry or jealous, to go out and pull the tops off 5 turnips, or to drink slowly a cup of rice water before speaking an angry word. Thereupon the miller's wife fell on her face and begged pardon of her husband. Then all the family, young and old, while walking home, laughed heartily at their mistakes. When a Korean begins to laugh, it is sometimes hard for him to stop, but after half an hour all was quiet again. After that, nearly everyone who could afford it bought a mirror. All the girls in the village sooner or later possessed one. They used to look into its face so often to see their own that the oiled paper carpet fronting the mirror was, in many houses, soon worn out. In Seoul, the mirror makers wondered what had happened in Cucumberville, the village, so long famous only for its cucumbers, but they slapped their thighs for joy and grew rich. Old Timbertop. The fairies in the Korean province of Kangwen, which means river meadow, were having great fun when one of their number told how they played a trick on an ox driver whom they called Old Timbertop. How he got such a strange name this story will tell. This driver was a rich and stingy fellow who had made a fortune in lumber. He used to buy up all the trees he could. Then he would have them cut down and sawed up into logs and boards. His men would haul them away in their rough carts, drawn by stout bulls, to his lumber yard. In winter-time, sleds were used, but whether it was the season of snow and ice, or of tree blossoms and flowers, the animal used to draw sleds or carts was always a bull.